looks like most of you are on here. So you guys did get the requirement sheet, right? I uploaded to you guys. Did anybody not get that before we get started? Yes, cool, all right. Okay, so the very first protocol, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and start the recording here. If at any time the camera, you guys can't see something real well, let me know and I'll try to adjust it for you, okay? But for the first practical, we're going to start with the hips. And notice that the requirement sheet has a tension left. So what we're going to do is a left hip. And I just, want you to know that as you're taking your histories of your patient, make sure that it is the right hip versus the left hip and vice versa there. So you always have to be aware of which hip are you actually scanning, because we're going to do bilateral, but then we're going to do some dedicated ones as well. So notice the very first thing here, we're going to go ahead and go to our lower extremity, because we've done now brains, we've done our spines. If you click on lower extremity, you'll notice we have foot, ankle, knee, hips, femur, and so forth. So we're going to drag over the left hip, okay? And we're going to disregard these blue protocol here. I cannot delete out, okay? So we're just going to start down at the survey. And notice that the coil that we're going to pick is going to be our Sense XL coil. And if you go to your elements, we're going to make sure all of them are turned on. Within this coil that we're going to show you in lab, we can turn on all the elements, or we can just turn on the upper elements of it, the lower elements, or only the central elements of it. But we're going to turn on all of them, so we get equal signal throughout the entire Torso XL coil. Notice it's a Sense coil, and with Sense, that means that we could, if needed, we can do parallel imaging. So we can, make our scans faster if we turn on the parallel imaging, which Phillips calls Sense. So we're going to proceed and start. And our first 3-plane pilot then that comes up is going to be an axial localizer, a coronal localizer, and a sagittal localizer, okay? We can just go ahead and do our reference real quick here. What it's saying is that, let me just change the orientation here. I have to go ahead, and we just had to upload all of these protocols back in here, so I might have to do some changing on some of these here. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and just put all these red lines, fill the entire field of view again, okay? And then our very first sequence is a T2 axial spare. And we're going to do these of the bilateral hips. So I want you to know that because it says spare, this is a fat sat, okay? And remember when we did fat sats in the orbit protocol, we had the volume box, okay? So we're going to do that again. So we're going to go ahead and click on our axial T2 fat sat. We have that green box here, that's our volume box that we're going to shim, okay? The field of view then, right away, number one, it says select your field of view to cover appropriately. Well, if I want to get rid of this green box for now, I'm just going to go ahead and hide it and click on this volume button here. So I need to make my field of view longer, right to left for sure. And I'm plugging in about a 320 and maybe even go to like a 340 here. Now, if I page through just a couple of these axials, okay, I'm already through all of my musculature of my hips. And everything out here that I'm looking at if I look at my coronal localizer here, that is all fat. And if I'm doing this for an MRI of the hips, I don't need to include all the fatty area unless there is an actual mass or tumor or something that I'm looking at that area. So right to left, I have around a 340. Then anterior to posterior actually looks pretty good. I have 250 here. If I look over at my sagittal localizer, notice that I'm pretty much about from skin to skin. If you feel like that's too close and you want to open it to like a 270, I'm going to change my right to left back to 340. That would be fine. If you want to get a little bit outside so you don't cut off anything, that's okay. So I have my field of view set nicely here. My slice thickness, therefore, is going to be 4 at a 1 gap. So I'm going to change this here to 4. I'm going to change my gap to 1. It is at 1. And then if I look at I'm going to move my slices up here. I'm going to page through my coronals and try to get maybe that best picture. I can see my greater trochanters right here, okay? And I can see the femoral head in this area. If my greater trochanter is located here, if I look, do you see how there's this little structure here? That's your lesser trochanter. So we want to cover from the middle, from this iliac fossa, all the way through that lesser trochanter. So again, I'm going to move these slices up. So here is my iliac crest, right up here. You can see at the very top of the crest there. So I'm going to go right to the middle. That's where this iliac fossa is located. I'm going to start there. And then I want to make sure then I get all the way through that lesser trochanter. So I'm going to go ahead and add maybe about 4 slices. And I'm going to position my slices like that. Okay? And I don't know if you can see very well. I'm going to take this camera and really try to magnify it up here. Okay? So if I take my slices off, and if I use either my center here as a ruler, I want to kind of just make sure that I am going to get evenly both the right and the left hip at the same time, or at the exact same slice. Okay? I can probably even change and go down a slice. Up a slice, and I can see the femoral heads here as well. So I just want to make sure that I don't need to angle my slices one way or the other. And it looks like this particular patient was pretty straight. So that's where I'm going to kind of, just look to see if I need to angle it. It's pretty straight. I'm going to bring it back down, and I'm now in from the iliac fossa, and then here's my lesser trochanter, and I'm going to make sure I go all the way through that. Okay? So hopefully that helps you here. I'll try to mag that up every now and then if that helps. I can turn my slices back on. Okay? Now, I like my slices, and I like my field of view. I'm going to go ahead and look at my TR and my TE then. And I want it to be T2 weighted. So right now I have a 3000 TR at a 90 TE, and my TR is user defined. And I'm like, well, I'm not real sure what TR I even need for 30 slices. So I'm going to change it to a range, and I'll go 3000, and maybe I'll even go up to like 8000. And notice what that does is it'll adjust my TR to 4,626. I have a TE of 90, and then it actually brings it down into 2 packages. Okay, so I like that. My TSE, or my turbo factor, is in that 20 range, and I have a 22, and that's good there. Okay, if you felt like you wanted to go ahead and, bring it up to a 24, there's different reasons of, there's always that sweet spot that you want to kind of pick to choose from. But, we're in that 20 range. And then with this being a fat sat, we're going to take our contrast tab, and we're going to scroll down to where it says Fat Suppression. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring this closer here. Okay? So notice here it says Fat Suppression Spare. So we're going to go ahead and look at the inversion delay, and it says 111. So what makes it a little confusing on these Philips scanners is we want our inversion delay to be 1/3 of our spare TR. Well, our spare TR is 305. Our inversion delay is 111. So if we just take 111 times 3, that's 333. And this is 305, and that's pretty close, okay? So this is the area that we're just looking at, is this inversion delay. If you wanted to bring this down to, let's say, 100, well, 100 times 3 is 300, and that's pretty close to 300 there, right? Ooh, I'm sorry, I'm trying to look at 2 different screens here. So when we're looking at spares, and again, a spare is the T2 Fat Sat option that we use on Philips, and we're going to look at the inversion delay, and you're going to tell me, I'm trying to do we want to do 1/3. So if you do 1/3, your spare TR, your inversion delay should be 1/3 of your spare TR. So if my spare TR, and you can round up to make it easy, so if that's around 300, 1/3 would be 100, right? So try to make it easy math. And is it always 1/3? Yes. It is always 1/3 if we want that full fat sat suppression. And remember, I talked about in lecture that if you want maybe only half of your fat suppressed, well, then this is where we adjust our inversion delay. We can adjust this number to get more fat signal in our pictures, okay? So don't get too confused, but when you are practicing, this is where I want you to look. I want you to look and say, okay, it's a spare. This is my inversion delay. And what is my spare TR? Well, my spare TR is over here, and it says that it'll use, with a delay of 100, in order to go ahead and get full fat sat suppression, it's going to use about a 300 here. Okay? So, and if there's any other questions, once you get into your lab class, we will clarify that with you, okay? There. Shalika, how many slices do you have? I had 30 slices. Okay? So, I do want to get full fat suppression. I'm going to turn on my volume box, and I'm going to go ahead and position that within my field of view, and I'm going to shim all of the anatomy just from skin to skin, okay? So if I turn my field of view box back on, So what you kind of notice is my shim box is almost about the same size as my field of view box, because really there's not a lot of air that I'm trying to not shim out of, kind of like when we did with the orbits. So, you know, your field of view box is here. My shim box is just a little bit inside of it. Can you kind of see there's a green line? I'll try to bring it up closer here. There's just a little bit of green line that I brought in a little bit closer, anterior to posterior, but I want to shim all the way out from the right side to the left side here. Okay? There we go. So I have my shim box pretty much the way I want it. I have my slices where I want it. I'm going to take this green shim box and move it up a little bit more. Sometimes it's hard to click on that, isn't it? Get rid of my stacks here. Okay. My phase direction now, so if I kind of look at number or the letter D under this protocol, what two directions do I have of phase? I have either right to left or anterior to posterior. Now, if I would pick an anterior to posterior phase, will I need fold over? What do you guys think? Yes. Yes. It's actually pretty close. Todd, I kind of would agree with you, because if you look at my red lines, go back here. Change this back here. Okay. If I look at these red lines, A to P, there is pretty much not any anatomy, anterior to posterior, that I have to rule or worry about wrapping in. Okay? I'm going to get rid of this there. Okay. So if I would pick A to P, I can turn off fold over. Now, if I decide that, do you see in this particular axial localizer, and I'm going to bring this up closer here. So if you notice on this particular image, these are your vessels. And you can kind of see there's already some ghosting A to P from these vessels here. So it might be nice to go ahead and do your phase A to P, and your hips are on the outside of that. Or if you look at this and you want your phase to go right to left, well, that might be just anterior to where your hip region is. But again, that's going to be your call. If you would want your phase to go right to left, then you will need fold over, because you're going to have this skin right to left, or some of the fat from this hip that's going to wrap in. Does that all make sense to you? Yes, good. Okay, so that's going to be your call. You tell me what you want to do. We got the shim box positioned. Now, do you want to use a rest slab? Well, that's going to be up to you. Many times, because this is a T2 and I have already a high TR, I can go ahead and turn on a rest slab. And because I know that there's a lot of flow coming down from my abdominal aorta, so I can, oh golly, not that one. I can turn on this rest slab. See, I do the same thing. I'm trying to take this rest slab and move it here. Oh, I'm sorry, that's why it's on perpendicular. I want it to be on free, there. So I can swing this rest slab and put it right above where my field of view is located. And so this way, any kind of abdominal aorta flow coming down can hopefully kind of be wiped out, so I don't have as much flow going through where my slices are going to be. So that's an option to do. Sometimes people will even do one above and one below your slices. So the venous flow coming up is actually wiped out of the XY plane as well. So, you know, that's your call if you want to put those on or not. I'll take those off here. Okay. The letter E, I'm telling you to turn on the sense. Well, your sense is located under the geometry tab, and it's right under where your reconstruction matrix is. So right now it says no, I am not using any parallel imaging. If I turn it on yes, then it's going to drop down with the P reduction factor. So go back to physics. Anytime you're using parallel imaging, you can either fill all the lines of K-space, or you can fill part of the lines of K-space and let the computer extrapolate the other numbers or the other data sets for you, okay? So the P reduction factor, if you leave it on 1, that means you're filling all 100 lines of K-space, or not 100 lines, all the lines. In essence, you're truly not utilizing parallel imaging. But if I go from 1 to 1.1, or to 1.2 here, 1.1, 1.2, every time I go up in P reduction factor, I'm filling less lines of K-space, which means I can scan faster. So at 1.1, it's going to take me 4 minutes and 43 seconds. But if I go to 1.5, I can now, it's only going to take me 3.5 minutes. Okay, earlier I meant minutes instead of seconds. But every time you go up in P reduction factor, the time goes down. So again, do you want to, how high of your P reduction factor is really going to be dependent on maybe your patient, if they can hold still. Your P reduction range is going to be from 1.1 to 2. You cannot go over 2. So you're going to do 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and so forth. So what you want to take into account is every time that the less lines of K-space you're filling, the faster it's going to scan. The computer's going to go ahead and extrapolate the other lines of K-space with data. And at some point, if you go to 2, basically it's only going to fill half of the lines of K-space, extrapolate the other half. And you could lose a little bit of edge detail in your images. But if you have a patient that absolutely cannot lay there, and this is the only option you have, then that might be what you have to use. So that's kind of where, as a technologist, is, you know, you make the call. Many times I would use a P reduction factor of about 1.3 to 1.5. Didn't like to go over it any much higher than that because I didn't want to lose some edge detail. But if I had a patient that was moving and was in a lot of pain, and I had to get this scan done as fast as I could, well, then I'm going to have to maybe up it up to that 1.9 to 2. I'm going to suffer a little bit of my edge detail in order to get something for the radiologist to read. So hopefully that makes sense to you, okay? Going back to your question here, Todd, does a rest lab or fat affect the time? And on a T2 weighted image, you might not notice that the rest labs affect time, because when you turn on fat saturation, when you turn on a rest lab, it is going to require another RF pulse, okay? And you might have time to do that with such a long TR. So you don't necessarily notice the effects on a T2 weighted image, but on a T1 weighted image, you're going to see it affected more. Only because with shorter TRs, you don't have enough time to do several rest labs. And you know, with T1, you know, we do T1 fat sats, but sometimes then your TRs are going to be required to be a little higher. So therefore, you might have to do them in 2 to 3 packages to bring your TR range where you want it to be. Does that all make sense? Got it. Good. Okay. So I do like how this looks. I'm going to change my P reduction factor. It says 1.5, and I'm says, tell me what happened. What changed? Well, what changed was my time. And I want you to understand why. And it's all because of how you are filling K-space, okay? It's 3.5 minutes. It looks good. I got my volume box on, and I'm going to proceed and start. Now I'm going to do a stir coronal, and that's way down here, bilateral, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and double click it, and I already did a nice T2 axial. So I'm going to replace this axial from my pilot with the T2, and I'm telling you it's under series 6 here. So we're going to use this one. So I'm going to take my lines and I'm going to turn them off so you can see, okay? So as I page through these axials, notice that this is actually a pretty good looking axial image. Now, it's not T2 weighted though, because this was actually scanned. If I look over here is a PD. This is a proton density weighted image, okay? And again, we do a lot of proton density weighted images when we are scanning the extremities, okay? So I can go ahead and try to find the slice on these axials where I'm right in the center of the hips. And pretty much, you know, you go right where you can see the nice femoral heads. I'm kind of in the femoral neck region here. I kind of like this particular image. I think it's slice 8 here, and I have the nice rounded femoral heads, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and bring my slices back up here, okay? Magnify this back up here. So this is going to be a coronal. So I'm going to now click on my coronal viewport and say, well, what is my field of view? Well, do you guys like this field of view that I'm positioning right here? I'm going to bring this camera closer. Do you like that one? Do you like that field of view? What would you guys change? Good. You're cutting off the greater trochanters. Perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my field of view left to right bigger. I'm plugging in around a 320. And I like that because, you know, I'm getting all of my musculature in it, and I'm into my fat, but I don't really need to get all of my fat because I'm not looking at anything out here, okay? So now notice I have from the iliac crest here, and I have way below my lesser trochanter, so I can bring your field of view down. So yeah, that's what I'm just talking about now. Head to foot, let me maybe bring that down to 250 and do foot to head 250 by 320 right to left. And I apologize if this is moving. I'm trying to take this camera so you can see it better here. So if I get the very top of the crest here, and I can still see your lesser trochanters here, I could even probably go down to maybe 230. And I still have the top of the crest here, and I can still see my lesser trochanters here. And I really want the center of my picture frame here where the center of my hips are pretty close in the center. Okay, so here's the top of my femoral head, and here's the center of my picture frame. So that doesn't look too bad. What do you guys think? Do you guys like that? Your field of view is 230 foot to head by 320 right to left. Okay? So once I have my field of view set, okay, then I'm going to go ahead and look at my slice thickness. I'm going to do 4 at 1. Here, okay? So I'm going to position my slices here. So I'm going to go to my axial, and what I like to do before I turn my lights back on is to kind of almost look at this center as a ruler, and I want to make sure that I do a true coronal. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I have a slice going right through the center of both femoral heads. And if they're laying in there, you're not going to have to angle much. If they're laying in there perfectly straight. Okay? So as I page through these axials here, now notice that this is the very top of the hips, and then now I'm going to go down to the very bottom here. And at this bottom part of the hips in this axial images is where I can see your ischial tuberosities, which is right here. Okay? I can then see my pubic symphysis, which is right here. So I only need to cover for hips from the ischial tuberosity to the pubic symphysis. So I don't need this many slices. So I'm going to go ahead and bring it down here. I'm going to turn my lines back on so you can see my lines. Okay, ischial tuberosity, there you go, yes. Which is basically the very tip part of your butt bone, okay? Your ischium is the bone at the very posterior aspect of your pelvis, and what you sit on is the ischial tuberosity. So notice that I have 23 slices. I'm covering from the ischial tuberosity all the way through the pubic bone. If I page back to the center where my hips are, look now, this is the coverage that I like. And I will cover the entire hip joint by setting it up like this. Okay? So that is 23 slices that I have positioned here, or that I have on. So now I can go to, I like how it's set up. Now I can go to my contrast and say, okay, this is a stir coronal. Number 2 is a stir coronal. So I'm going to go ahead and look at my TR. My TR is 2800. It's on user defined, and I'm like, you know, I really want to do a range because I'm not sure what TR I need. I know I want to be over 2000, and I'm going to kind of keep around 8000 here. Okay? My TE that I use, it's on 75, but for a stir, we like to use it around 40 to 60. So I'm going to change that to 60 here. Okay? So the actual TR then that I'm using is going to be 2000 and a TE of 60. And then my TI, because my inversion delay for fat, because remember that's what a stir is that's the ice cream looking thing, right? Okay, so if your range was 2500 to 4000, I'm okay with that. That's no big deal. You can change this to 2,500, okay? So then what it's saying is then your actual TR is going to be 2,500. No, 8,000 is not wrong. Nope. That's just telling you the range. You're saying anything between this here, okay? We're over 2,000. So my TI, my inversion delay that I want for a stir, because I want it to suppress fat, is going to be 140. And remember, we use a 140 to 160, right? And the reason there's all these ranges is because it kind of all depends on the software you have, the gradient strength you have, the magnetic field strength you have. I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into things. But as long as you have it within these ranges, you're going to be good. My turbo factor for a stir I have is around 12. And that's okay. Sometimes, you know, you might even can use 15. 12 to 15 is okay. Okay, 12's actually giving me 4 minutes and 50 seconds up here. Okay. So I have my parameters set. If I look at my field of view again, now what phase direction do I want? I can go head to foot or I can go right to left. If I look right to left, there's all of this fat that will wrap. And if I go head to foot, I know darn well I'm going to wrap the upper part and the lower part. So you have to put fold over on. So whichever way you want to pick, I'm okay with. So I'm going to go back to my fold over. I like right to left, but I'm going to need fold over. So I got to make sure my fold over is turned on. Otherwise, I'm going to have a bunch of fat wrapping into these coronals. Okay? Tell me what SAR level you're in. So, SAR level, and I'm going to take the camera here, is located, your SAR level is right here. So I am less than, or anytime you're less than 2.0, you're going to be in normal operating mode. Anything above 2.0 to 4.0, you're in first level. So right here it says I'm in first level SAR. And that's okay. You can scan in first level SAR. The only time you don't want to scan in first level SAR is if they have an implant that says you have to scan this in normal operating mode. And that's okay, because all you have to do is go, if you have to, you go to your contrast tab, you go down to your SAR mode, it's on high, I can change it to moderate, it'll put me at less than 2.0, and now I'm in normal. What it does though, it does adjust the RF that is being utilized. And so notice now my time is up to 6 minutes. Because it's going to take a little bit longer because I'm using a little bit less power, a little bit less RF. But that's okay, right? Because I have to do that because of what my implant card says. So if your patient does not have an implant, you can scan in a high SAR mode. I'm on first level. The only thing you would never want to scan is above 4.0 because you will get a lot of nerve stimulation from the patient, and it is actually against the guidelines to scan above 4.0 watts per kilogram anyway. So that's kind of something new that I want you guys to look at. SAR mode is under your contrast tab. Okay? Does that all make sense with SAR mode now? Yes? No? Hopefully? Okay, good, good, good. And another way that you know that you're in high SAR is if you look at your protocol and if you see this red little thing, that means your SAR is elevated. See down here? And you can scan high SAR, but you never want to scan 3 high SAR scans in a row because you could be getting too much tissue heating on your patients then. And they're going to maybe start to get pretty hot in there. So just kind of watch that you're not scanning 3 high SAR scans in a row, okay? So I'm asking you then, is this time appropriate for scanning? It's going to take me about 5 minutes. If you tell me, I don't care, this is fine, 5 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and scan it. If I say, yeah, but you know, this patient can't lay in there very well, so what would you want to do? Chelsea, you're telling me to bring my NSA down, but I'm already at 2. I really don't want to do I don't want to do a NSA of 1. What could be another thing I could turn on? You can change your turbo factor, okay? Let me change my turbo factor here. I'm at 12. If I go up to 13, it's actually going to take me a little bit longer here. It's not going to adjust it much for me here. I went from 12 to 16. That's not really helping. If I go down to a 10, see, there's that sweet spot. It's not really changing it much for me. Think about, I have a sense coil, right? So why not try to go ahead and turn on sense? That could be a way. If I turn sense on and I put in a P reduction factor, remember, if you use 1, you're really not using sense. It's still filling all of your lines. So I either have to do 1.1 or higher. And if I would just even do a 1.4, I've dropped it down to 3.5 minutes. I have a sense coil. It allows me to do parallel imaging. Why not? You know, utilize the coil's advantages that you have. Okay? So that's just some things to think about. We're going to proceed and start here. Everything else looks good. Now I'm going to set up for unilateral. So unilateral means, oh, I'm only going to do one side. And it's the left side that's affected. So I'm going to go down here. Notice that all of these are all bilaterals. And then here's a unilateral axial and then a unilateral sagittal. So if I double click on this, okay, it's going to kind of almost, I'm going to turn off my volume here to get that box out of the way. It's going to actually pop up on my left side. If the pain is on the right, then I'd want to go ahead and position it over here, correct? Well, I'm going to position it onto this left side here. I got a better coronal, so I'm going to put on a better coronal here, which is here. Okay, so I'm going to page through where I have a nice coronal, right into the center of the hip joint here. And this is to assess a femoral neck fracture. So I'm going to go ahead and do the angled one. Remember where we're angling that right through my femoral neck. Okay? But the very first thing that I want to do, what scan is that? It is, for your coronal, it is scan number 5. Okay? So the very first thing that I want to maybe position is my field of view box. And I'm telling you to pick a 150 by 150 here. So I'm even helping you out and say, I like 150 by 150. Position it right into the center of where your left hip joint is located. So when I say image 5 over here, Chelsea, I'm in the, where you can pick what scan, it's scan 5 over here. That gives me a better coronal localizer that I replaced the slice is 12. But you know, you're going to be able to pick which slice you like. I just happen to pick the slice, there's slice 11. Slice 11 is a nice one to pick as well. Okay, just pretty much where you can see the left hip joint and the femoral neck. So I'm going to make my slices now thinner because I'm doing a dedicated smaller field of view hip here. I'm going to do a 3 millimeter at default. So 3 millimeter at default is going to be a 3 millimeter at 0.3 because it's 10%, okay? So then I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, I want to angle right through my femoral neck, right like that. And I just want to make sure I'm from greater trochanter to lesser trochanter. And it's on 20 slices, and that's actually not too bad. And I'm going to page through my coronals, and I can see here's my lesser trochanter, and here's my greater trochanter. So I might say I'm going to add 2 more slices just to make sure that I get greater trochanter to lesser trochanter. I can then page back up in my coronals, and this is good to go. Okay? I can go ahead now and look at what phase direction I have. We'll popping back over to, I'm doing an axial oblique now. I either have A to P or right to left. And I truly don't want right to left because I have all of this area and all motion from this area that would be going right to left. So I want to pick a phase direction of A to P. Am I going to need fold over? Yes. I have a smaller field of view and I'm going to have these things wrapping in. Okay? So that is turned on. Fold over is turned on. So the next thing then is, this is a PD. PD is high TR in that mid-range of TE. What TE factor, again, from my lecture, do we want our TE to be for articular cartilage? You guys remember? Yes. So let's just right off the bat, I'm just going to plug in 45. Okay? My TR, I'm going to change my TR to range. And I just kind of want it to be, if you like 2,500, we can go back to that 8,000. Okay? So I have a TR of 2,500, which is fine. I have above that 2,000. I have my TE range 45, which is going to be my nice PD, articular cartilage weighted. This will give me PD, and then my turbo factor is going to be around that 10 to 15, right? And it's at 14. That looks good. It's only 3.5 minutes. I like that. Now this is a PD weighted, but it's also a PD fat sat. So, oh, that's right. I have to go down into where it says spare. And my spare, I'm going to look at the inversion delay. I'm going to bring my camera closer here again. Okay? So if your inversion delay is 100 and my spare TR is 227, that is about a third. Or if I even just take it and round it up to, 230 divided by 3 here. I mean, you can maybe change it to a 90. 90 times 3 is 240. That's about that range here. So as long as you're in that 1/3 area, you're good to go. Does that make sense to you guys? If you feel like you want to do an 80 here, 80 times 3 is 240. Or let's say even say a 70. 70 times 3 is 210, right? So here's this inversion delay that you want to be 1/3 of your spare TR. Okay? So that's where I want you to look at. That's going to give you full fat sat suppression. And again, we're using spare. So 80, so 70 to 90 is cool. Correct. Absolutely. Yes. So we are going to get full fat sat suppression. That's what I want. Okay? And you're good to go. It's 3.5 minutes. Do I want a rest lab? Not really. I don't need one. I'm going A to P, and the only thing I have A to P here is I have fat. And if there's some vascular flow here from my internal iliacs, A to P, it would go through here. But if you're really looking for a femoral neck out here, you should be good to go. If you felt like you wanted to do a rest lab above and below here, you could if you wanted to, but you don't have to on this particular set. Now, it is a shim. That's right, I don't want to go ahead and start it yet because I'm going to turn my shim box back on. And I'm just going to go ahead and now shim and none of it's in air, right? Because I'm actually within the joint here. So I'm just going to shim out to the edges of my field of view. Does that look good to you guys? There we go. Perfect. You got your shim box on. I'm telling you, what kind of voxels are you using? Just verify it to me. It's under geometry. I'm using a 0.8 by 0.8. That's giving me a 188 by 186 here. Okay, just tell me what you're utilizing. You can click proceed and go. The last one is a T1 sagittal. Make sure you set it up over, I'm going to turn my volume box off. Make sure you set it up over the correct hip. And here you want to get all of your acetabulum all the way through your greater trochanter again. Okay? So you can set it up straight. I'm telling you to do a 170 by 170. Okay? Because again, remember in that sagittal plane, we're kind of looking at that ischial tuberosity, and there's a tendon that goes down the very back of the butt area. So you can kind of set this up straight. Sometimes your book will say, oh, they like to angle it with the acetabulum. So if you are at a site that they want to angle it like that, perfect, that's okay. You can keep it straight as far as I'm concerned. Either one's fine. But just make sure that you get that greater trochanter all the way through the actual joint. And you have all these coronals that you can kind of page through and say, yeah, I'm not cutting off anything there. Okay? We're going to do a 3 millimeter at default again. Okay? This is a T1 sagittal spur. So first of all, T1 sagittal. So T1, I have a turbo factor of 3. I have a TE of 20. I have a TR of 500, and it's on user defined, so I'm just going to do a range and say, well, if I do a range of like 300, and I don't want to go over 700, it's going to give me an actual TR of 576, a TE of 20, looks good, and a turbo factor of 3. Perfect. I like it. The only thing now is spur. Think of spur. Oh, that's right. That's the fat sat for a T1. So I'm going to go under where the fat suppression is at, where it says here. It says spur. And if I wanted to say, I don't want a strong T1 fat sat, I kind of want a medium or a weak. And that's why I'm going to hover over here. So this is where on the spur, instead of a change in the inversion delay on a spare, it's very easy on a spur. Because here I can either change it from strong to medium to weak. And that will vary whether or not I get no fat in my image, whether or not I get a little bit of fat in my signal, or whether I get a lot of fat and I do a weak fat suppression. Okay? So that is what this spur means. And I'm just telling you to change your spur level for maximum fat suppression, and you're going to want to make sure it's on strong, because if I have a strong fat suppression pulse, it's going to go ahead and get about all of my fat protons out of my picture. Does that make sense to you? Hopefully. Okay, so then I like that. Phase direction for the sagittal. Well, your sagittal box should be over here, but I can't see it because I really don't have a good sagittal that is to the side of the hip. This sagittal was taken right at isocenter, which is straight down. okay? But I know I either have head to foot or A to P, and yes, you're going to want to pick A to P with your phase direction. So I'll look at my phase direction, it's A to P. I am going to need fold over because I can see this is A to P on my axial, and I'm going to have to turn on Fat Suppression fold over so it does not wrap in. And it is on. Okay. Now, I'm just asking you, it's 2 minutes and 21 seconds. Change one parameter to decrease time. And give me another parameter that increases my signal. Okay? So what parameter would decrease time for you guys? What do you guys think? To decrease time, what could I pick? Good. I can turn on my sense coil. My P reduction is 1.8. What would I want to change it to? If I chose to utilize the sense coil and to utilize the P reduction factor, what could I change that to? It's a 1.8. I want to make it faster. I want to decrease time. Good. I can go to 2.0. Yes, that made it faster. Now, if I go to 1.5, Shalika, I'm filling less lines of K-space, so it's going to take me longer. Okay? That makes sense? Now, give me another parameter that increases signal. Okay, what would you do to your NSA? How am I going to increase signal? Go up or down? It's at 2. Do I want to make it 1 or do I want to make it 3? We don't want to go below 2, but I want to increase signal, so I have to go up. If I'm going to use NSA to increase signal, I'm going to go from 2 to 3. And it costs me in time, but that's okay. I went down in time with my sense. I increased my NSA to 3. I've gotten more signal. It's still only 3 minutes. So do you see how you can play with parameters in regards to time, in regards to signal, and so forth? Okay? And that's it with number 4. And we'll start it. So I know we spent all of our time here on the hips. Quickly, I'm just going to pull up the femur, and I'm not going to necessarily go through every detail because I think you guys understand by now how to set up field of view, how to go ahead and change turbo factors and so forth. But we're going to pull up a femur. And there's an Owens femur here. There is a femur protocol here. And we are going to use the exact same coil for a femur as we do for the hips. And I have to make sure that my sense coil is turned on. And I'm going to use the Sense XL coil again. And I want to make sure all of my elements are turned on. I'm going to use everything, right? And I'll start it there. And then here is now my 3-plane. And if you ever want to just mag these up, okay, there you go. And here you go. So I have a nice axial. This is a coronal. Now notice this sagittal, because it's taken right down through the center, I'm really just getting some fat from the inner thigh that popped in, okay? So many times then, what we'll do is, let's see here, this is my, there we go. So my 3-plane pilot here, it's popping up that if you want to take another 3-plane pilot. So many times if I don't have a good sagittal, because my 0 is in the center of this inner thigh, I will take another localizer and I'll put my sagittal slice over either the right femur or the left femur, depending on what you're scanning, and I'd run it again. Okay, then I'd get a nicer sagittal to replace this one that I don't have very good one on the very first one. Does that make sense? Okay, so this particular case did not do that. They didn't run 2 localizers. They only ran this first one, and that's okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to fill all of our lines with the reference again and start it. The number 1 is to set it for a stir coronal. Okay, so here's my field of view box. I just need then to make sure that I get a field of view that's going to cover the entire femur, and we're going to say this patient's pain is in the right. Now, I don't have a better sagittal because this particular case, they didn't run another one. But I'm going to let you guys pick and pull up a better sagittal so you can kind of visualize what this sagittal will do for us. And I'm telling you in your paper, even though we haven't scanned it, you can pick up series 4 there. So replace your localizer in your sagittal viewport with series 4, and then page through these sagittals till you're in the middle of the shaft. Okay, so about right there, right? Right there, I'm in the middle of my shaft. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my field of view of my coronal. I'm going to go ahead and change foot to head. I'm going to need a lot bigger foot to head. Okay. Whoa. Shoo. So if I'm at the very top of my femurs there, I don't probably need 400. I'm going to maybe go down to, let's go 370. And I'm here at my femoral head here, and I'm actually almost through my knee joint there. I'm going to blow this back up. And you see how here's the very bottom part of my knee there. If you feel like that's cutting it too close and you want to go 380, I'm okay with that. But it's just that you're looking. You're looking to say, okay, do I have both joints on? I've got my joint in the proximal femur, and I'm including my joint in the distal femur. Okay? Now, going right to left, I can bring in my field of view right to left much smaller. 300 is probably too small. Let's maybe go 330. So do you notice I'm cutting off this fat again? And that again is going to be dependent, well, what are you looking for? You want to make sure you include all the musculature, but as you get out to the fatty area, if your problem is pretty much right in this structure, you're okay. That is okay, because again, I want to use a field of view. I don't want to just go wide open. I want to use field of view that will tailor it to what I'm looking at. So if I like this field of view, which is 380 foot to head, 333 right to left, now I'm going to go to my slices here. And the reason I like this sagittal is because it'll allow me to see whether or not I need to angle. So if I let it up straight, now notice that, you know, if I'm doing the proximal femur, this is actually going kind of right through the center proximally pretty good. If I'm doing more of the distal femur, I might want to angle it where I'm going to go ahead and get a nice coronal more through the distal there. Does that make sense to you guys? Or if you want to try a little bit of an angle in between, that's okay too. But I know I need more slices because I'm cutting off some muscles, right? So I'm going to probably need to add, oh, let's see, I went to 23. If I page through all of these, that's still cutting it pretty close over here. I'm probably going to go to maybe about 26 slices. Let me page through them all. That's why I like to use all of my slices because, you know, your anatomy changes. And I'm getting pretty close over here, so maybe even 28. I'm going to go to 28 slices. And then if I page through all these sagittals, I like what I got. Okay? So this is how I would set up for your bilateral femurs. This is going to be a stir. You can kind of read through the rest, and that's all in regards to what kind of weighting you're going to get. When you do a sagittal stir here, I'm going to do it of the affected side, okay? And I'm going to get a better coronal here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up a better coronal, which happens to be series 3. I can page through this here. And then once I find my images where I can kind of see, I can see my femoral head all the way down to my knee here. And again, here's my field of view over in my sagittal here. Foot to head looks pretty good. Maybe you can even bring it down a little bit, foot to head to what? What did we use? Around 390, 380. Okay. That was giving me nice coverage, foot to head of the entire femur. And if I look over at my sagittal, I can even bring in my field of view smaller A to P. Because, you know, notice this sagittal is more of a rectangle, isn't it? Your femurs are like rectangles, so I can almost bring my field of view down to 200 A to P. And again, just make sure you're not cutting anything off A to P. Okay? And what that does is it saves me in time because I don't need to sample air. I don't need to make my field of view way out at 300 because there's no reason I need to sample all of this. So I'm going to bring it down. What did I have, 250? No, or 200 I think I had. Okay? And now I just got to make sure I cover all the musculature right to left. So I'm going to make sure I add a lot more slices. And I think I told you I wanted a 4 at 1. So it's at 4 at 1 gap. So as I'm looking at these coronals then, I might want to add a couple more here. Just as you page through these, make sure you have all of your musculature in, because again, we want to see the quads, we want to see the adductor muscles, we want to see the hamstring muscles, all of that within this femur, okay? So everything else you can go ahead and read about weighting. I'm asking you here what the Sar level is. Again, you can always look at the Sar level. It's always on the right hand side here. And if you need to change it from first level to normal, remember I showed you how to do that under the contrast page. I go to Sar mode and I just bring it down to either moderate. Moderate still keeps me at high level, so I might have to go to low. Now I'm at normal, okay? I'm going to proceed and start here. And I'm asking you to set up a T1 axial of the right femur only. So if I go to your axial T1 here, okay, notice that it pretty much fills, you know, the entire, from the hip on down. We're going to do the entire, but I only need it of the right femur only. So I'm going to bring this over to the right side and I can adjust my field of view to cover just that right femur. So I'm going to go maybe a 280 and then I'm going to go A to P. Let's try 280 there. Well, I can probably go down maybe a little bit. 260 by 260, that doesn't look too bad. If you really wanted to be tight, you could do 250 there. Okay, so you pick out what field of view you like. And then you can just set this up. It's a 4 millimeter at 1.5 gap. And then you can adjust the parameters to make it T1 and so forth. Okay, so you can read all that. The very last one, it says the radiologist wants to add on an additional sequence that's not in this original protocol. Set up a stir axial to assess a stress fracture through the cortical bone in the mid shaft. So how would you do this? Well, there is an axial stir right here. So I'm going to go ahead and just pull this one up. And I'm going to go ahead and set this up. And I will tell you in your practical where your stress fracture is at. And you just tell me how to set this up. You're going to go ahead and change the field of view. You can keep this slice thickness at 4 at 1.5. Set up your appropriate parameters with TR, TE of your stir. Make sure your voxel is below 1 by 1. And I want to make sure that your scan time is less than 5 minutes. So here's where you're going to need to play. Play with your parameters to get this scan down less than 5 minutes. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and stop because I know I went way over. But with going through this in our lab class and with you practicing this for your lab open labs, I think you will do fine. Okay? Any questions, always ask and let me know. Thank you.